We switched gears quite a bit from George Beverly Shea to a guy named George Frideric Handel. And I'm guessing that Gene Bowen has heard of this gentleman. That's just a guess. However, contrary to popular opinions, he was not born in England, and he was not born wrapped up in the British Union Jack. Rather, he was born in Germany, the Duchy of Magdeburg. 1698, when he was 13 years old, he played for Frederick I of Prussia. He was a fairly important guy at that point. 1702, he studied law at the University of Halle. I don't know how to pronounce it. Halle. And takes a position as a church organist in Halle. So he gets his big start when he's, 17 years old, he's an organist. 1703, he accepts a position as a violinist and harpsichordist in the orchestra of the Hamburg Opera. And by 1705, when he's 20 years old, his first two operas are produced. Now, I should mention these are secular operas. These were not sacred operas. 1706, when he was 21, he begins composing sacred music in Rome, including Dicit Dominus, the Lord said, in 1707. 1707, he begins composing oratorios. He decides that seems to be a nice genre for him. Now remember what an oratorio is. An oratorio, I guess the cheap way is to say it's an opera but without the actors. So it tells a story, but it doesn't have people acting out the parts.
So like Messiah?
Pardon?
Messiah? Handel's Messiah?
Oh, let's get into Messiah.
Hey.
But yes, you are correct. The most famous example of an oratorio would be Messiah. 1710, he becomes Kapellmeister. I just love those German terms. To German Prince George, Elector of Hanover. And this will become significant in a moment, as you will see.
What's a Kapellmeister?
Well, head of music.
Okay.
Barbara Eford's position at Marston.
We should change that. We should call her the
Kapellmeister.
Kapellmeister.
1712, he moves to England. There were various reasons as to why he moves to England, but I think the key one is in 1714. The guy, his old employer, George, Elector of Hanover, become King George I. So Handel was kind of the advance party for King George I of England. And needless to say, they remained very close for the rest of Handel's life. 1718, he writes his first English oratorio. Now this is key. Everything he'd written up until that point, he'd written in German. But he's in England now. And his old pal, the Elector of Hanover, is now the King of England. So he starts writing in English.
The irony is his boss, the King of England, never learns English.
Yeah.
Was he the king that only spoke German?
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
1727, he writes 4 anthems for the coronation of King George II. Zadok the priest is still used in coronation ceremonies today. Now, of course, we haven't seen a coronation ceremony for 60 years. And I just happen to know the exact date because she just celebrated her 60th anniversary. 1737, Handel's right hand is paralyzed, perhaps from a stroke or rheumatism, but he does eventually recover. 1741, he needed to write a new oratorio in a short time because I'm not making this up, the theater was already booked and he hadn't written the oratorio yet. So he writes this little ditty called The Messiah in 24 days. In 24 days he wrote Messiah, which is by far the most famous piece of sacred music ever written. There's like, you look at albums and back in the 60s or 70s, and how many songs from the albums that were #1 were released as singles. This oratorio is filled with #1 songs. It's amazing. 1743, the London premiere. 1742 it's performed for the first time with about 30 singers. Today, when we see Messiah performed, there tend to be 60, 70, 80, 100 people singing it. But when it was originally written, it was written for 25 or 30 people to sing. In 1743, here we go into legend. It's the London premiere of Messiah. And legend has it that King George II stood up during the performance of the Hallelujah chorus. So, of course, everybody else stood up because the king stood up. And guess what? People are still standing up today when this song plays. Isn't that amazing? We stand up for the Hallelujah chorus because King George II stood up for the Hallelujah chorus. It is such a wonderful, wonderful tradition. 1759, Handel dies and is buried at Westminster Abbey. 1789, Mozart writes an adaptation of the Messiah.
It tells you something when Mozart covers when
He doesn't cover This wonderful, wonderful wood carving shows Handel as a child playing the harpsichord late at night, discovered by surprise members of his family. It's a wonderful wood carving. Thank you. I just think that's absolutely wonderful. Today, Handel is most remembered as a composer of Messiah, easily the most well-known piece of classical sacred music ever written. Anybody want to disagree with that assessment? Dr. William Baker has pointed out for thousands of Americans, this masterpiece of the High Baroque may be the only performance of classical music they attend in their life. I think that's spot on. I think that's absolutely correct. He wrote 29 oratorios, 120 cantatas, trios of duets. His oratorios include Deborah Esther. Judas Maccabeus is probably his the second most well-known one after Messiah. I've sung Messiah and I've sung Judas Maccabeus. Samson, Saul, Solomon, and Susanna. So he wrote a number of popular oratorios. So there's a few well-known songs that we associate with Handel. The one I'm going to play in a moment is Comfort Ye People. I'm guessing that you are familiar with the Hallelujah chorus, so I didn't think I had to play that. So I'm going to play Comfort Ye People, which is the tenor solo. The tenor solo. There are no other tenor solos next to Comfort Ye People. And the glory of the Lord, and the glory of the Lord. In case you don't know that one. For unto us a child is born, glory to God. Hallelujah chorus. Rejoice, the Lord is King. Rejoice, the Lord is King. Text by Charles Wesley. So a lot of hymns and sacred music that is still very familiar today. How many people, if you were writing your own course on the 25 greatest influences on Christian music, would have included George Frideric Handel in the top 10? That one was not a tough.
It's hard not to put him at, I mean, when you look at the Hallelujah chorus, it's hard not to put him at number one. I'm sure you have reasons for putting him where he is, but I mean, the Hallelujah chorus is possibly the greatest.
And you may be right.